As the shovel hit something solid beneath my backyard, a dusty wooden box surfaced. And within seconds, Karen Fitzgerald from the HOA was already stomping across the lawn, screaming about violations. But when the box cracked open and a yellowed envelope fell out, her face went ghost white. I had just moved into Pine Valley Gardens a month ago. The neighborhood seemed perfect at first glance, manicured lawns, white picket fences, and the kind of quiet that should have been peaceful. Should have been. That was before I met Karen Fitzgerald, the self-appointed queen of the HOA. In 30 days, she had already issued 3 warnings for what she called infractions. My trash can was visible from the street for 20 minutes too long. My car was parked facing the wrong direction in my own driveway. The shade of white I used to touch up my mailbox was apparently 1 tone off from the approved HOA color palette. When I mentioned my plans to landscape and found an old map in the garage, I didn't expect anything unusual. The previous owner, an elderly man named Walter Grayson, had left behind boxes of documents and old photos. Among them was a hand-drawn map of the property with an X marked near the back fence. I figured it was probably nothing. Maybe where he buried a time capsule or his dog's favorite toy. But curiosity got the better of me, and on a sunny Saturday morning I decided to dig. The box was buried deep, like someone had gone out of their way to hide it. 3 feet down. Then 4. My shovel finally struck wood. The sound echoed across the quiet street, and I noticed Karen watching from her window across the way. By the time I had cleared the dirt from around the edges, she was pacing on her front lawn, phone pressed to her ear. I could practically see the steam coming from her ears as I worked to free the box from its earthen prison. As I pried the lid open, the old hinges protested with a rusty screech. That was all the invitation Karen needed. She stormed across the street, her sensible heels clicking against the pavement with military precision. Her voice hit me before she did, shrill and demanding. "Stop what you're doing this instant," she commanded, waving a clipboard like it was a weapon. Section 12. For of the HOA bylaws clearly states that no excavation exceeding 18 inches is permitted without prior board approval. This is your 4th violation, and I will be recommending immediate fines. I ignored her, focused on the box. The wood was old but well preserved, and as I lifted the lid fully, I could see it was packed with yellowed papers and what looked like photographs. But the movement jostled the contents, and the box shifted, tipping just enough for a small envelope to slip out and land directly at Karen's feet. She picked up the envelope, her tirade momentarily forgotten. I watched as her eyes scanned the first few lines visible through a tear in the paper. The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. Her hands began to shake, and she dropped the envelope like it was burning hot. "You shouldn't have found this," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. Then, without another word, she turned and practically ran back to her house, leaving her clipboard behind on my lawn. I had never seen Karen Fitzgerald retreat from anything, let alone abandon official HOA documentation. Inside the box was a collection that made my amateur archaeology expedition suddenly feel significant. Black and white photographs showed groups of people at what looked like property surveys. There were boundary markers, handshakes over documents, and stern-faced men in 1950s attire. A deed, brown with age but still legible, detailed property lines that didn't match the current neighborhood layout. But most interesting was a notarized letter, and right there in neat, typewritten letters was the name Fitzgerald, not Karen, but Theodore Fitzgerald. The documents hinted at something big. As I pieced together the papers, a story emerged about a decades-old property dispute. Theodore Fitzgerald, who I assumed was Karen's father or grandfather, had been involved in what looked like a controversial land acquisition. The photos showed him shaking hands with city officials over documents. But the accompanying letters suggested not everyone had agreed with how the land was divided. One letter, signed by multiple neighbors, accused Theodore of using his position on the city planning board to redirect property lines in his favor. The most damning piece was a surveyor's report that showed the original property boundaries. If I was reading it correctly, a significant chunk of what is now the community park, including the playground and half the walking trail, had originally belonged to other families. Families whose names I recognized from street signs throughout Pine Valley Gardens: the Graysons, the Millers, the Johnsons. The envelope Karen had dropped contained a confession of sorts, though water damage made parts illegible. I scanned and photographed everything, creating digital copies on multiple devices. Then I carefully returned the items to the box and brought it inside. The next morning, I expected Karen to come storming back, but instead, she tried a different approach. She appeared at my door with a plate of cookies and her best fake smile. "Good morning, neighbor," she said with forced cheerfulness. "I wanted to apologize for my behavior yesterday. The heat, it just gets to me sometimes. I hope we can put that little misunderstanding behind us." I smiled back, equally fake. "Of course, Karen. By the way, I was wondering if you could help me understand something. That letter that fell out yesterday, the one with the Fitzgerald name. Would you happen to know anything about that?" Her smile faltered for just a second before she recovered. "Oh, I'm sure it's nothing. Probably just old neighborhood gossip. You know how people were back in the day. Always stirring up drama over property lines and such nonsense." "Interesting," I said, keeping my tone light, because it looked like it might have been about the community park. Something about how the land was acquired. "Since you're so knowledgeable about neighborhood history, I thought you might be able to clarify things." The plate of cookies trembled in her hands. "I really wouldn't know anything about ancient history like that. Now, about those HOA violations we discussed." "Actually," I interrupted, "I think this might be a matter for the full board." "When's the next meeting?" Her face went through several expressions: fear, anger, calculation, before settling on rigid control. "Next Tuesday, 7 p.m. sharp. But I really don't think." "Perfect. I'll be there." Tuesday night arrived and the community center was more packed than usual. Word had somehow spread that something interesting might happen at the typically dull HOA meeting. Karen sat at the head table with the other board members, shuffling papers and avoiding eye contact with me. I waited patiently through the usual agenda items: approval of minutes, treasurer's report, complaints about dogs barking. Finally, during new business, I raised my hand. Karen tried to ignore me, but board member Tom Richardson, who had always seemed to chafe under Karen's iron rule, recognized me immediately. "I'd like to discuss a historical matter that might affect current HOA operations," I began, standing up with my folder of copies. "While doing some landscaping, I discovered some documents that suggest there might be questions about property boundaries in our neighborhood, specifically regarding the community park." Karen slammed her gavel so hard it cracked. "This is not appropriate HOA business. Sit down immediately or I'll have you removed." But I continued, pulling out the first photograph. "These documents show that Theodore Fitzgerald, who I believe is your father, Karen, may have used his position to improperly acquire land that belonged to other families." The room erupted in whispers. Someone in the back pulled out their phone and started recording. Karen's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. "These are lies," she screeched, abandoning all pretense of Robert's Rules of Order. "Fabrications. This man is trying to destroy our community with false accusations." But Tom Richardson was already looking at the papers I had passed to him, his expression growing more serious with each page. "Karen, these look like official city documents. Is this your father's signature?" "I don't have to answer that," Karen shouted. "This is a witch hunt. This man has been nothing but trouble since he moved here. He parks wrong. His mailbox is the wrong shade of white. He dug illegal holes." Another board member, Janet Morrison, had started examining the surveyor's report. "Karen, if this is accurate, we might have a serious legal problem. The park renovation we approved last year, did we actually have the right to do that?" "Of course we did." Karen's voice had reached a pitch that probably violated noise ordinances. "I've been president of this board for 15 years. I know every inch of this neighborhood. Because your father stole it." Someone called out from the audience. That's when Karen completely lost it. She threw her gavel at me, missing by several feet and shattering a window instead. She began screaming incoherently about conspiracies and jealous neighbors, and how she had devoted her life to Pine Valley Gardens. She grabbed the meeting minutes and tried to tear them up, then attempted to snatch the documents from Tom Richardson's hands. "Someone call 911, Janet Morrison said calmly, as if HOA presidents had meltdowns at every meeting. But it wasn't the police who arrived first. A man in an expensive suit entered the community center, followed by two younger associates carrying briefcases. "Good evening," he said smoothly. "I'm David Chon from Chon and Associates. We represent the Grayson estate. We received a very interesting phone call about some documents that have surfaced." The room went silent except for Karen's heavy breathing. The lawyer's eyes found her immediately. "Ms. Fitzgerald, I believe. We've been looking for these documents for quite some time. The Grayson family, along with the Millers and Johnsons, never dropped their claim to the disputed land. We've simply been waiting for proof." Karen's response was to faint. She went down like a sack of HOA violation notices, taking the podium with her. The next hour was chaos. Paramedics arrived to revive Karen. Actual police officers showed up to take statements. 3 different news vans pulled up outside, their reporters eager for a story about suburban scandal. Through it all, I sat quietly in my chair, watching the empire Karen had built on her father's deception crumble around her. Tom Richardson had already called an emergency vote to remove her as president, which passed unanimously. Janet Morrison was recording everything on her phone, occasionally shaking her head and muttering about lawsuits. When Karen finally came to, she was informed that she was no longer president, that criminal charges for assault were being considered for the throne gavel, and that Chan and associates would be in touch about the property dispute. The estimated value of the disputed land, the lawyer mentioned casually, was approximately $12 million. Karen's scream could probably be heard 3 neighborhoods over. As the paramedics wheeled her out on a gurney, she had fainted again upon hearing the dollar amount. She managed to point one shaking finger at me and gasp, "You destroyed everything." The next morning, I woke to find an envelope under my door. No postmark, no return address, just my name written in shaky handwriting. Inside was a single piece of paper with one line, "You were never supposed to find that box." I looked out my window at Karen's house, where a moving van was already being loaded. Then I looked at my backyard, where the hole still gaped open like a wound in the earth. I made a decision. That afternoon, I carefully wrapped the box in plastic, added a note of my own explaining what had happened, and buried it again, deeper this time, with concrete on top. But I kept the original envelope, the one that had fallen. It